Hi, and welcome to another Aspericity video tutorial. I'm Mike D'Souza, and today I'm going to be talking to you about how to make REST requests from a React app to a Node.js server using Axios. In this tutorial, we're going to create a simple blogging feature in React that uses Axios to make REST requests to a Node.js server. In the last video, we actually created that Node.js server, and it actually acts as an intermediary, sending the request on to a headless Ghost CMS that we created in the first video. So before we start with creating the React app, I just want to go over to the aspericity.com website where we've created our new blog. The Tech Nomad blog is based on the same code that we're writing in this video tutorial. So we've added a bit more styling that matches the Aspericity site, and there's a few additional features, but otherwise the code that you see here on this Tech Nomad blog is the same code that we're doing in this video tutorial. So we've got a couple of blog posts. We'll just click into one of them. The blog post contains a title, an excerpt, some metadata, an Unsplash image that we got from unsplash.com, the post content, and an embedded video file. So let's head back to the Markdown and we can get started. So the first step is we actually want to go ahead and create the React app, and we're going to use the create React app template. We're going to create a project called Test React, but you can name it whatever you want. This will take a few moments to run, so I'm going to stop the video and we'll come back in a moment. Okay, so that is installed successfully, and now we can go ahead and change directories into the Test React project directory. And the only thing we need to do right now to finish this setup is to install two dependencies, Axios and React Router. Okay, and I'm going to stop the video while this installs, and we'll come back once it's done. Okay, so those two dependencies have installed properly, so we can go ahead and run the project in VS Code using the code dot command. And before we start coding, I'm just going to come back here and grab this markup file, markdown file. And paste it into our new project. Open it up in preview. And we're ready to go. Okay, so the first step, now that we've created the React app, is we need to go into the index.js and add the routing. So let's go over to our source. We'll click index.js, and we only have two things to do in here. The first is we need to import browser router as router. And we're going to do that from React router DOM. And then in the JSX, we need to add that router tag and wrap it around the app tag. So we'll come down here, we'll click tab, and we're all set with the index.js. We've added our routing. So let's go back to our Markdown. We're going to scroll down. So the next step is to add routes to the app functional component. We're going to add two routes for the two pages we're going to create, the home page and the blog page. The home page is going to represent the new or existing website that we have and all the content that would not have anything to do with the blog. For all intents and purposes for this tutorial, really all it's going to be is a link to the blog page. The blog page is going to contain a list of posts that we use Axios to get from the Node.js server. So the first step is we're going to make a copy of the app.js and copy it over to the home.js file, as we want to retain all the default styling that we got from the create React app. So let's go ahead and do that. Do a copy and a paste, and we'll rename that as home.js. So let's head back to our markdown. And now in the app.js file, we want to import the route and switch components from React Router DOM, as well as the two functional components which are going to represent the home and blog page. And then once we've imported those, all we need to do is add the routing to our JSX. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so we don't need these two imports here for the logo and the CSS, since this file is just going to do routing. Now we can import our switch and route from React Router DOM. And then now we can import our home page functional component from /home and import the blog page from blog. So next, we can just delete all of this JSX inside of the return, and we're going to add a switch tag. And inside the switch tag, we need those two routes. So the first route is just going to go to the root. So the path is equal to /, and then we can add a component reference that's going to go to our home functional component. And then the last thing we need to do for this route is set it to exact. And the reason we do that is we don't want it to match the other routes. And what would happen is that if we had other routes that were / something, we could have some confusion. So we don't want that. So we set it as exact. And then the next route is the route to our blog page. So we're going to do that as /blog. And then the component equals blog, and that finishes that route. And we're all done with the app.js. So let's head back to our markdown. Okay, so we're going to scroll down here. So the next thing we need to do is create our homepage functional component. The homepage is largely a placeholder for the rest of the site content that's not our blog. So all we're really going to do is add a link to it. And you may notice we're importing link from React Router DOM. And the reason we're doing that is instead of using the HTML anchor tag, which would cause a page reload, when you use link, it's actually going to just reload the DOM. So, because React creates a single page application, or SPA, we want the page to load within by refreshing the DOM rather than doing a full page reload. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's come over to our home page. And in this case, we're going to retain the logo and CSS. So all we need to do is do an import of the link component from React Router DOM. And then we need to rename this as home. So we're going to do a const home equals empty brackets arrow function. So as mentioned, we're renaming this functional component and using the ES6 arrow function notation. So let's just update our export here to home as well. And then we're going to come down here and remove all of the JSX except for that image, the React logo. We might as well keep that because it looks kind of nice. So then we're going to add an H1 tag for our header. And inside here, we're just going to say test home page. And then lastly, we just need that link. So we create the link tag, and we're going to retain the styling. So we use class name, and we'll use app link. And then rather than using an href, link has a to attribute that we need to set here. And since we're going to our blog, we're going to have /blog And then all we need here now is our link text. So we can say go to blog. And then we're all set. So let's head back to our markdown. We're going to scroll down. So the next thing we need to do is create the blog page functional component. So this is where we're actually going to make the REST request to display a list of blog posts. But initially we're just going to create the page and put some placeholders in just so we have it ready to go. Okay, so the first step, we're going to copy home.js and we'll paste it. And we're going to rename that as blog.js. Come back to our markdown. So in here, again, we need to rename the functional component. We need to remove the logo import statement because we're not going to have the logo. And then we're just going to create an unordered list with a couple of placeholder list items. So let's go and do it. So we're not going to use the logo, so we can get rid of that guy. And then come down here inside the JSX. Oh, but before we do that, let's rename this as blog and update the export. And we can get rid of this image, rename the header to test blog page. And now the link that we're going to have will adjust to go to the root. We'll say go to home. And now just above that, we'll add our unordered list. And inside that unordered list, we're going to create a list item. And we'll call it blog post placeholder 1. And we'll make a copy of that. Blog post placeholder 2. And we're all set with our blog page. So we'll head back to the markdown. And now we're ready to run the app just to make sure that our pages are working. So I will open my terminal window. We'll do an npm start. And this will take a moment as well. So I'm going to stop the video and we'll come back once it's loaded up. Okay, so our localhost server has started. So we're ready to go and take a look. And we can see that the test homepage has loaded with our lovely little React logo. And we've got a single link that says go to blog. And if we click on the blog link, we can see the test blog page with our 2 list items and a link back to the home page. And so yeah, we've got a basic pair of pages right now. So let's head back and do a little update on that. So let's go ahead and scroll down here. Okay, so the next step is to create the list of posts on that page and do the Axios get. So we're going to use React hooks to actually create a state variable to maintain that data, and then we're actually going to use effect to get that data on the page component mounting. So if you're familiar with sort of the older way of using the lifecycle methods, hooks is similar to that, but I won't go into those details. So we're going to do a couple of imports, Axios and the useState and useEffect. We will get a state hook for data, and then we're actually going to use a map method on the array of posts that we receive to render the list items. So let's go ahead and do that, and we'll come back to deal with the useEffect after that. Okay. So, as mentioned, we need to add the useState and useEffect. And then as well, import Axios. Okay. So now we need to add that data state variable. So we'll go const data, and we'll call set data for the setter function. And we're going to set that equal to useState. And we're going to set an initial state of an object which contains a post array that is empty. So when we render the map with an empty post array, it's going to basically put nothing there. So that's what we want until the data is actually retrieved, and then it would render the full set of data. Okay, so now we need to replace the two placeholder list items with our data.posts.map, and this has an arrow function with post. And inside this JSX, we're going to create our list item. And the list item needs an attribute called key. And this key attribute is used for React to identify which list item is being updated. So inside the markdown, I have a link that goes to the react.js.org site that gives a lot more information on how this works. If you're interested in understanding that, I recommend you go and check that out. But for now, we're just going to assign the key a unique value, which is our post ID. And so now we've got our list item, and what we're going to use is the post.title. And that's it. That's what we need to render the list of post titles. So the only thing that we have left is to actually go and get that data. So let's go back to our markdown. And we're going to scroll down. And here we have our effect hook. So we're going to do a useEffect. And inside here, you'll see that we're actually declaring a new function that's an asynchronous function. And I won't go into a lot of details, but inside of a hook, if you're going to have an asynchronous function, basically this is the way you need to do it. You need to declare that function as an asynchronous arrow function here, and then we actually call that function. So let's go ahead and go back to our blog.js file, and let's create that effect. So we're going to do a useEffect. And that takes an arrow function. And inside the arrow function, we're going to do a const fetch data. And this is its own asynchronous arrow function, which has a try block. And inside the try block, now we're going to do a const response, which will get the value of the data that's being returned from the get. And so now we need to await that get. And now we have our Axios get. And that goes to http://localhost 5000. That's where our Node.js server is listening, although we haven't started it yet. It's where it will listen. And then we need to put the endpoint. So our endpoint is API/ghost/posts. Okay, so now, oh, I can see we just have a little error here. Just need to get rid of that. Okay, so now we need to actually handle, in this situation, setting the data. So if we've got a successful response, we're going to want to set the data, and we'll take the response.data, and that's going to set our data state variable here. And once that occurs, React will go ahead and update the post ID and post titles once we have that data. Okay, so now we need to wrap up this try block, and we can do a catch, and we just catch any errors that come our way. And for this tutorial, we're just going to console log those errors. Obviously, if you had error handler middleware or something like that, we'd want to deal with that here. But you know, for a short tutorial like this, this is probably sufficient. And then now that we've created this internal function, we actually have to call it. So we're going to do this fetch data, and we're basically all set for our function here, except for that we need to come in to this guy. Let's make sure all of our brackets are correct. And so inside this useEffect, useEffect actually takes up to 2 parameters. And we're going to add a second parameter with an empty array. And the reason we're doing this is the way it works right now, if we did not have this empty array here, what is going to happen is this useEffect will occur. If we didn't have it at all, we just had this one parameter with the arrow function, then it would actually update on every component update, or also on the mount. And we only want it to occur on the mount. So what we're actually doing here is saying, well, only do this useEffect on mount, and anytime the variables inside this array change. So since we have no variables inside this array, then what's going to end up happening in effect is that it can only occur when the component mounts. So that's what we want, and we're all set with our useEffect here. Okay, so let's go back to our markdown. So now we're ready to take a look at it, but of course, since we're actually making a request here, we're going to need our Ghost Headless CMS and our Node server started up, and that'll take a few moments. So I'm going to stop the video, and once I've got those ready to go, we'll come back. Okay, so I've started the Ghost Headless CMS and the Node.js server. We can see Ghost is running here, and I just started that with a Ghost start command, and we can see it's running on port 2368. And then as well, I've just started the Node.js server with a node index.js command, and you can see that the server is running on port 5000. And we're still running our React localhost on port 3000, so we're all set. Let's go take a look. So here we have our test homepage. We'll click go to blog, and we can see here that none of our list items have appeared. So let's go ahead and do a right click and inspect to see our Chrome Dev Tools. And we'll go to our network tab, and then we're going to refresh here, Control R, and we can see actually that the post is coming back as red. So if we flip over to our console tab, we can see that there's actually an XML HTTP request going to localhost 5000 and our endpoint from localhost 3000, but it's being blocked by CORS policy. So CORS, or cross-origin resource sharing, is something that the browser has some security where it tries to prevent sort of some things that occur that are not, under its policy. It's basically a security measure. So it prevents localhost from pretty much doing anything, but also it prevents a server, even on different ports, from talking to different ports. So what we need to do, and I'll just switch back to our markdown, we need a solution to turn off that security for our local development. When we do it on a server, we'll actually deal with that CORS issue through using our Nginx reverse proxy. But for localhost, we need a method of turning that security off in Chrome. So if we scroll down, I actually have this command that we can run from the command prompt, and we're just going to do a Control-C, that will allow us to run Chrome with disabled web security. Now, in fact, there are some Chrome extensions that allow you to create a little extension that allows you to toggle on and off, but I prefer this method, and I'm just going to run it. And the reason I prefer this method is I don't have to worry about, like, did I leave that toggle on or off? I'm launching its own window, and it's got this nice little warning that says that you are using an unsupported command line flag -- disable web security, stability and security will suffer. I highly recommend not using other tabs here. I don't know if that will also apply to those other tabs. Suffice it to say, what you really want to do is just do your local hosts here and use this for development and nothing else. So let's go to our localhost 3000. We can see our test homepage. We're going to click go to blog, and lo and behold, we have our list of blog posts. Okay, so let's go back to our markdown. And so the next step that we're going to have is we want to get the blog details. So this actually is going to require a few things that we need to do. We actually have to go ahead and change the post titles that we have inside of our list items into links. And we're actually going to make those dynamic URLs that contain the ID at the post ID at the end of that URL. And then we're going to retrieve that value on the post page that we're going to create. But before we create that post page, the other thing we'll need to do is go ahead and update the routing on the app.js. So let's start with the blog.js file. So we're going to go back here and come down. And in here, we're going to add a link tag. So again, we're going to reuse this class name to retain the create React app styling. So we do app link. And now for the to, we're actually going to dynamically create this URL. So we're going to need to execute, and we use the backtick, and it's going to be /blog/post. And now we need this dynamic portion. So we do $, and then bracket, and then post ID, and the closing bracket, the backtick, and another closing bracket, and then the closing bracket for the tag. And now we just need to copy the post title back to inside the link tag, and we're all done. So this is going to send a dynamic URL to that page. So now we can come back to our markdown. And the next step is to go ahead and update the app.js file with an import statement for the post page that we're going to create, and as well update those routes. So let's go over and do that. So we need to come up here and go import post from .post. And now we actually need to make this second route to blog exact as well, because we're going to have a subroute here for the post page. So route path equals /blog/post /post / and now we have a colon for this dynamic URL that's going to indicate that we're passing a parameter through. And this component is going to map to our post functional component that we're going to create. And we can close that tag. And we're all done on app.js. So let's head back to our markdown. Scroll down here. Okay. So the next step, we're actually going to copy the blog.js to the post.js file. So let's do that. Copy, paste, rename. And once we've done that, the next step is we're going to actually import this use params from React Router DOM. And that's going to enable us to get the ID parameter that we pass through as part of the URL. We'll rename the functional component. We will get that parameter so that we can use it and update the endpoint in order to get the posts by ID. So that's what we're going to do. And then lastly, we need to update the JSX for the page. So we'll come back before we do that JSX piece, but let's go ahead and do these parts here in terms of changing the endpoint. Okay. So we should have all our imports here that are correct, except for we want to add that use params here in the React Router DOM. Okay, and so now inside of our functional component, now we can use the let. We're going to get the ID from the use params. So we're going to do use params. So that returns that ID value that we sent in. And so now the next step is we need to update this URL. So again, because we are dynamically creating this URL, we need to use the backticks. And we're going to add to the end of the post the ID value, $. And then the closing backtick. And then we're all set. That should do the get. So we notice that it's recompiled, and we see that this React hook useEffect has a missing dependency ID. So, and that makes a lot of sense. The reason why is because if this ID were to change, we would expect that the data would change, and we would need to render the page differently. So we need to come down here now, and in this optional second parameter, we're actually going to add the ID. So this is now saying that, hey, if this ID value changes, we need to rerun this effect. Okay, so we're all set here. Let's head back to our markdown. We'll scroll down. And now all we need to do is update the JSX inside the header tags. We're going to remove the map because we only have one post that's being returned by the get by ID request. But we actually need to add this this data post 0 and then the JSX. So what this is doing is saying that, you know, unless data posts contains a non-falsy value, in other words, we've retrieved the data, we don't want to display this. And the reason why we don't want to do that is if we tried to run data post 0 title, we'd get an undefined error coming back. So this is a nice way to ensure that this JSX will only render when we actually have the post data. So let's go ahead and do that. Oh, and then as well, we'll update the link so that it goes back to the blog page as opposed to the home page. Okay, so in here, we're going to delete all of this JSX except for the link tag. And we need to do our data.posts 0 in order to ensure that we actually have some data to render. And then inside these brackets, we can have our JSX. So we are going to use a React fragment. And if you're not familiar with the React Fragment tag, what it's doing is providing a parent for sibling tags. And we're going to have an H1 and a paragraph that are siblings, and React would complain if you didn't have a parent tag wrapping those. Now we could use an HTML div, but that's just going to bloat our code a little bit more. Having a React fragment gives us a parent tag for those siblings, but when it goes to render the HTML, it's not going to create any tag there. So that's kind of nice. So let's go ahead and use that. And now we've got our header tag where we want to do a data posts 0 and the title. And lastly here, we want the paragraph tag. And inside here, we're going to do data posts 0 and the custom excerpt. And this custom excerpt is just a short description for your blog post. Okay, so now we can come down here. We're just going to update this link to go back to the blog list page, and we should be all set. So let's go back to our markdown, and then we can come and take a look at the, oh, hang on. Just want to check and make sure, do we actually update the functional component name? No, we did not. So just quickly change that to post. Posts, come down here and change the export. Come back to our markdown, and now we should be good to go. So let's go ahead and take a look. Come back to our React app, and we can see now that the test blog page has a list of blog titles, but they have links. So if I click on this Welcome to Ghost, we can see now we're on the detail page where we've got the Welcome to Ghost title and the excerpt and this Go to Blog. And we can see up here in the URL, we actually have the post ID. So we're all set. Okay, so we'll flip back here. We'll scroll down. So that's all the code for this video tutorial, but let's talk about a couple further enhancements that you could do to take this blog a little bit further. So one thing you may have noticed, that the second get that we're doing, the get post by ID, is actually returning a single post, and we actually got that post with all of the entire post data when we did the original get on the main page for the blog. So it's kind of repetitious. Now we could do some dubious sort of things like passing the entire object through the URL parameters, but I don't know, I don't think that's a really great idea. Larger applications use something like Redux to create a global store where we could store like the entire list of objects, and then we could go and just pass that ID and retrieve that object from that global store. Obviously that's probably overkill for our app where we have both the Node.js server and our Ghost Headless CMS hosted on the same server, or at least we plan to host them on the same server. So, like the additional request is probably pretty quick as opposed to like, adding Redux to our JS bundle. So another thing that we did on the aspericity.com blog is we switched over to using the slug endpoint requests instead of ID. And the nice thing about using slug is then you get a human readable URL. So for example, one of those default posts that Ghost gives you is a welcome one, and it would have /blog/post/welcome as opposed to an ID value. So that's something you could do, is switch over and use the get slug request as opposed to doing get post by ID. So you could do a get post by slug, or a number of different things. So you can also get authors, you can get tags. Those are some additional things. You could get comments. Those are some things that you could add further to your blog if you so choose. Okay. So the next thing I'll mention is that this code is completely publicly available for your use at GitHub github.com/asperity/testreact, in addition to the test node server that we created in our last video, and you're welcome to both of those. So I just want to say a big thank you to you guys for watching this video tutorial. If it was useful for you, please hit like. If you'd like to see more videos like this, please hit subscribe. If you have a comment or question, feel free to add it to the comment section below. Otherwise, stick around for the last video in this series where we'll go ahead and deploy this to a server. Thanks, everyone.